The quiet suburb of St. Charles, Illinois, was a place where people felt safe. It was the kind of community west of Chicago where kids could grow up without the constant fears that plague bigger cities. On Friday, March 10th, 2017, the school day at St. Charles East High was winding down just like any other. The hallways were filled with the usual chatter of students making weekend plans, the sound of locker doors slamming shut, and the general buzz of excitement that comes with a Friday afternoon. Among the hundreds of students flooding out of the school that day were juniors Brittany and Tiffany Coughlin. They were twin sisters, inseparable in many ways, and they were on the cusp of a major milestone. In just 4 days, on March 14th, they would celebrate their 17th birthday. They had their whole lives ahead of them, filled with the typical dreams of teenagers. They had left school just a few hours earlier. The routine of their day was completely normal, but that normalcy was about to be violently ripped away. Later that evening, as news began to spread through texts and social media, their classmates learned the unthinkable. Brittany and Tiffany were dead. The shock and devastation that swept through the school and the wider community was absolute. This wasn't a car accident or an illness. It was a murder. And it was the first murder the town of St. Charles had seen in 9 long years. A grim statistic that highlighted just how unprecedented and shocking this event was for everyone who lived there. The sense of safety that defined the community was instantly shattered, replaced by a profound grief. The story of Brittany and Tiffany begins with their parents, a couple whose relationship was built on a foundation of defiance and control. Anjum and Randy Coughlin met as teenagers while working at a discount store. Anjum was just 17 and Randy was 19. Their connection, however, was complicated from the start by immense cultural and familial pressures. Anjum had immigrated with her family from Pakistan when she was 12 years old. She was the third of 4 children in a religious Muslim family that held strict traditional values. Dating, especially outside their faith and culture, was completely forbidden. When Anjum turned 18, she made the life-altering decision to leave her family home to be with Randy. This act of independence and love came at the ultimate cost. Her family disowned her entirely. They cut off all contact, a severance that was so absolute it never healed. She was completely alone, with Randy becoming her entire world. Because of her youth and her inexperience with relationships outside of her strict upbringing, Anjum did not immediately recognize the controlling behaviors Randy began to exhibit. The red flags were there, but she had no one to point them out and no frame of reference for what a healthy partnership should look like. In a telling sign of his need for dominance, just 1 week into their relationship, Randy demanded that Anjum convert to Christianity. Despite these challenging beginnings, they got married and spent 10 years together before starting a family. When Anjum discovered she was pregnant, it was with the shocking news that she was carrying twins. She was terrified to tell Randy, knowing he had been hesitant to have even 1 child, let alone 2 at once. To her relief, when she finally broke the news, he was not upset. The stage was now set for a family life that, from the outside, might have looked normal, but was already built upon a foundation of control, isolation, and a mother's profound loneliness.
Despite sharing the same birthday and the same face, Brittany and Tiffany Coughlin were 2 distinctly different individuals, each with her own vibrant personality, passions, and dreams for the future. Their mother, Anjum, often remarked that they were complete opposites, and this was clear to everyone who knew them. Brittany was the sun, outgoing, energetic, and the center of any social circle. She was a dedicated member of the cheer squad, her spirit shining during pet rallies and football games. Her energy found another outlet in gymnastics, where her discipline and strength were on full display. Beyond school activities, she worked in the bakery department of a local grocery store. Her coworkers there didn't just see her as an employee. They described her as vibrant, a young woman who brought genuine light and joy into the room. Brittany made friends with an effortless grace and possessed an undeniable, non-stop smile that masked the trouble she sometimes confided to close friends about her home life. In stark contrast, Tiffany was the moon, more reserved, thoughtful, and introspective. She wasn't immediately open with people, but when she felt comfortable and got to know someone, she would gracefully come out of her shell, revealing a witty and deeply loyal friend. Her passion was not for crowds, but for creatures. She worked at a pet store and felt a profound connection to animals, a bond she found more straightforward and trustworthy than human relationships. She felt that an animal's love was unconditional, a safe harbor from the potential hurt people could cause. Academically, she excelled, tackling challenging AP classes with a quiet determination. She seriously considered becoming a veterinarian, drawn to the idea of healing and caring for animals, but was deeply deterred by the single responsibility of having to euthanize them, a testament to her gentle and empathetic heart. Friends said that Tiffany, in her own quiet way, could light up a room simply with her smile and her calming presence, and that knowing her made you want to be a better person. While their personalities diverged, the twins shared a powerful, unifying love for music and going to concerts, a shared interest that provided common ground and countless happy memories. Together, they formed a complete picture of youthful potential. Brittany with her boundless social energy, and Tiffany with her deep, compassionate intellect, making the tragedy of their loss all the more profound because the world was robbed of two uniquely beautiful and promising young women. For 28 years, Anjum Coughlin navigated a marriage that was, by her own account, a long and slow process of walking on eggshells. By February of 2017, when she and 48-year-old Randy decided to separate, the split was not a sudden impulse, but the culmination of a lifetime of control and quiet desperation. Anjum had asked Randy for a divorce multiple times throughout their marriage, but a complex web of fear and financial dependency always kept her tethered to him. Randy was the undisputed breadwinner of the family, and he wielded this economic power as an ultimate weapon to maintain control. He explicitly told Anjum that if she ever left him, he would quit his job, ensuring that neither of them would have the means to get by. At the time, Anjum only worked a side job, and without the support of her extended family safety net, she felt she had no other options. The lack of an extended family safety net made the prospect of single motherhood terrifying, so she decided it was easier, or at least safer, to stay. They even attempted therapy in an effort to salvage their relationship, but it did little to curb Randy's escalating need for dominance. As time went on, his personality changed. His ego grew, fueled by his role as the provider. He began to operate under the belief that because he financially supported the home, every other member of the family needed to answer directly to him. This control became suffocatingly mundane.
It got to the point where Anjum could not make even the smallest purchase or decision without his explicit permission. She began to defend herself, arguing with Randy that he wouldn't even allow her to spend $2 without his approval. Simple acts of personal care, like getting a manicure, were forbidden. He only permitted her to get a haircut once a year, and even then it was only to trim the ends. This oppressive atmosphere did not go unnoticed by their children. A classmate of Brittany's reviewed that the vibrant cheerleader would occasionally confide about the troubles at home, explaining that she wasn't sure if she would be able to complete her school assignments because her home life was so difficult. Her friend observed that while Brittany put up a strong and smiling front for the world, the pain and stress were visible to those who looked closely. This insight into their home life reveals that the girls were living in a pressure cooker, fully aware of the unhappiness that simmered between their parents, a tension that would eventually boil over with catastrophic consequences. The already strained atmosphere within the Coughlin home took a darker turn in 2015 when Randy, at the age of 46, was formally diagnosed with depression. This diagnosis marked the beginning of a new and more volatile chapter for the family. Randy began taking prescribed antidepressants, but he simultaneously started drinking heavily, a dangerous combination that can profoundly alter mood and judgment. This mixing of medication and alcohol exacerbated his underlying issues, creating an unpredictable and increasingly unstable environment. As the girls grew older, entering their teenage years, their awareness of the dynamics between their parents sharpened. They are no longer young children who could be shielded from tension. They could see and understand the unhappiness that permeated their home. For Anjum, this was a pivotal realization. It became more important than ever that they leave the situation, not just for her sake, but for the well-being of Brittany and Tiffany. The decision to finally separate in February 2017 was therefore driven by a mother's desire to protect her daughters from a toxic environment they were now old enough to fully comprehend. When Randy and Anjum sat the girls down to tell them about the separation, the twins were not surprised. The years of walking on eggshells, the controlled finances, and the silent dinners had spoken louder than any announcement. It was visibly clear to them that their parents were profoundly unhappy together. The practical arrangements of the split reflected both Anjum's limited means and her unwavering dedication to her daughter's stability. Randy remained in their luxury 3-bedroom, 4th-floor apartment in St. Charles. Anjum, financially constrained, moved into a small 1-bedroom condo just down the street. She made this choice deliberately, wanting to stay close to her girls. She believed that their lives would be less disrupted if they remained in the familiar home they had always known with their father. At the time, she never once questioned their safety with him.
For Anjum, the move itself was a small taste of freedom. For the first time, she was able to decorate her own space and make it her own, something Randy had never allowed her to do in their shared apartment. However, the physical separation did not break Randy's need for control. He forbade Anjum from seeing the girls without his presence. Even if Brittany and Tiffany wanted to spend time alone with their mother, he would not allow it, insisting on being there to monitor their interactions. This rule extended his dominance over the family even after he was no longer living with his wife, ensuring that his influence remained the central force in all their lives and setting the stage for the final, tragic confrontation. The last 2 days of the Coughlin twins' lives were a tense countdown to an unimaginable catastrophe. It began on Thursday, March 9, 2017, when Randy went to Anjum's new condo. The two talked and drank wine together, a familiar ritual that now held a terrible new tension. During this conversation, Randy made a desperate plea for them to reconcile and get back together. He wanted to restore the family unit, to return to the structure of control he had built. Anjum, however, had tasted a sliver of independence and stood firm. She looked at the man she had spent most of her life with and told him clearly that she wanted a divorce. This rejection seems to have been the final crushing blow. The very next day, Friday, March 10th, the pressure escalated dramatically. While Anjum was at work, Randy began flooding her with messages. These weren't about reconciliation anymore. They were messages of despair, saying he wanted to kill himself. Later in the day, he called her, and the tone shifted from self-pity to something more ominous. He told her cryptically that he had secrets, too, and he invited her over to his apartment that evening so he could explain.
Anjum, rightfully alarmed, told him that he was scaring her. She begged him to just tell her what he meant right then and there, over the phone. But Randy insisted. He refused to elaborate, creating a terrifying mystery that he promised would only be solved if she came in person. To ensure her compliance, he lured her with a practical excuse. He told her he had paperwork to give her. A woman living in the apartment complex later provided a crucial snapshot of the moments before the horror. She saw Randy and Anjum walking up the stairs to the fourth-floor apartment at about 4:45 p.m. She noted that Randy seemed to be in a frantic hurry, taking the stairs 2 or 3 at a time. Strangely, they did not appear to be upset or arguing.
As Anjum Coughlin stepped back into her former apartment on the evening of March 10th, the scene that greeted her was deceptively ordinary, a chilling facade masking the horror that had already taken place. She noticed her daughter Brittany lying on the couch, turned away from the door. But something was immediately wrong. The teenager was completely still, an unnatural stillness that contrasted sharply with the familiar sounds of the television. Anjum, operating on the premise of Randy's ruse about paperwork, moved into the kitchen to look for the documents he said would be there. Randy stood behind her, a silent and looming presence. It was then that he issued a simple, devastating command. He told her to turn around. When Anjum turned, her world shattered. She saw Randy holding a gun to his own head. Stunned and disbelieving, she pleaded with him, her mind racing, her first fear being that the noise would wake the girls. It was at this moment that Randy delivered the most crushing blow with terrifying calmness. He told her they were already dead. In that instant, the life she knew was extinguished. But Randy's plan for her was not over. He then pointed the gun directly at Anjum's head and told her he wanted her to live and suffer. He wanted her to endure the permanent, agonizing pain of their loss. In a swift, brutal motion, he immediately lowered the weapon from her head to her legs and fired. A single bullet tore through both of her thighs, a wound designed to incapacitate but not to kill. Driven by a primal survival instinct and overwhelming shock, Anjum, despite her grievous injury, managed to stumble away from Randy. She fled to a bedroom, somehow managing to lock the door behind her, creating a fragile barrier between herself and the man who had just destroyed her family. At approximately 5:12 p.m., the silence of the apartment was broken by the sound of 2 separate 911 calls being placed almost simultaneously, one from Randy and one from a hysterical Anjum. Their dueling calls to emergency services painting a stark picture of the perpetrator's cold finality and the victim's unimaginable grief and terror. The immediate aftermath of the shootings was a blur of trauma, grief, and impossible decisions made in a state of profound shock. Anjum Coughlin was rushed to the hospital where she was not only treated for her physical wounds, but also placed on suicide watch for about a week.
The emotional devastation was so complete that she barely remembered the days that followed, describing them as a hazy, unbearable nightmare. She recalls the funeral, a moment that should have been for mourning, but instead felt surreal and wrong. Looking at her daughters in their caskets, she was struck by a painful truth. They looked beautiful, but they weren't my girls. The vibrant, laughing young women she had raised were gone, replaced by still, silent figures. In the months that followed, Anjum was consumed by depression, nightmares, and the immense struggle of coping with her loss. During this horrific time, she was forced to make weighty decisions while still in a fog of grief, choices she would later come to deeply regret. In an effort to sever ties with the past, she instructed that all items in Randy's apartment be thrown away. It was only later that the full weight of this decision hit her. She had not saved her daughters' journals, their clothing, or other personal items that could have provided a tangible connection to their lives. Every Sunday, without fail, Anjum makes a pilgrimage to the North Cemetery where her daughters and Randy are buried. She lays flowers at their shared headstone, a marker that bears her own name engraved next to Randy's, another decision made too quickly in the depths of her sorrow. She remains firm that she will not be buried next to him, stating she will lie on the other side of the headstone next to Tiffany. She chose to bury him beside his daughters, in her own words saying, "Be next to your daughters so you can tell them what you did." She places flowers on his grave as well, not out of forgiveness, which she says will never come, but as a complex acknowledgement that before that final day, he had been a good father. Anjum chose to stay in St. Charles in the condo she moved into just a month before the murders. In the years following the tragedy, Anjum Coughlin consciously chose a path of survival and purpose, transforming her profound grief into a force for change. She became a vocal member of the Everytown Support Fund, a nationwide community of survivors dedicated to ending gun violence. By sharing her story during events like National Gun Violence Survivors Week, she highlighted a critical fact. Randy had purchased his first gun just 1 month before the murders, while he was abusing alcohol and his prescribed antidepressants, and while they were in the midst of their toxic separation, a purchase she knew nothing about. This driving reality fuels her specific advocacy for common-sense gun laws, including extended waiting periods and a requirement for personal references during the purchasing process. A year after the girls' deaths, she threw a large 18th birthday party in their honor, and 100 members of the community attended to celebrate the twins' lives. She also got a tattoo on her forearm, a permanent tattoo she would have been against in the past. It reads, "I'm okay if you're okay," next to a music note, lyrics from one of Britney's favorite bands, with her daughters' names and dates beneath it. She returned to therapy, began exercising, and started traveling the world, things Randy had been against, determined to live fully for her girls. Friends and classmates who were left confused and devastated continued to honor Brittany and Tiffany's memory, leaving flowers and notes at a makeshift memorial at the apartment building and wearing their favorite colors, purple and blue, to school. Anjum's story is now one of enduring love and resilience. While she knows she will never fully recover, she continues to live in St. Charles, surrounded by the memories of her daughters, and uses her voice in the hope that her family's tragedy can help others recognize the warning signs of control and violence, and perhaps prevent another family from suffering a similar unimaginable loss. I thank you guys for your continuous love and support. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you enjoy stories like this. Leave a like if this story touched you, and I will be seeing you on our next episode.